Thank you everyone for joining this presentation today. And as you said, it's really a pleasure to be able to share with you some of the analysis and insights that I've been conducting over the past few months. So today we will be discussing some of the startup trends in HR tech. I'll give you a market overview of HR tech from a VC perspective, and then mainly focus on the subsegments and cultural trends and how they're playing a role in the industry. And then finally, I'll conclude with a personal recommendation on where I see the most valuable opportunities to invest in the space. So before I dive in, I want to begin with a simple question and a few thoughts for all of you today. So as you can see, can tech relations fully integrate with human relationships? Or will there always be some struggle between the two and a search for that balance? So what I mean by this is, as humans, with our human needs, characteristics, pain points, that really drives in tech innovation, or is it the other way around? Does tech innovation lead us to adopt different trends, behavior, ways of thinking that we're constantly trying to catch up to? So this kind of leads me to my main question in today's presentation, and something that I want you to keep in the back of your mind today. Is HR driving tech, or is tech driving HR? So as with many industries, HR is really transforming through technology these days and growing into an ecosystem of value and benefit and not just cost. So I will take you through the world in VC funding, looking at average deal amount, how the pandemic has affected VC funding, and what the future trajectory really indicates. And then we'll touch upon the subsegments and what comprises HR tech. So I'll identify 5 of those subsegments and share some of their subcategories, as well as look into, the top performing HR tech startups in the past 2 years and the active deal flow or VC amounts that have been invested into them. And then we'll look at the 5 growing cultural trends that have really affected the HR tech space and the areas receiving the most money. And then finally, provide a breakdown of 3 kind of pillars of where I think the future dollars will land, so to say, and what characteristics you should really look at when you're looking to invest in an HR tech startup. So the graph that you see here right now, you're looking at some data that I found from PitchBook from the years of 2015 to 2021. So global VC funding into HR tech startups, which is world funding as well as US funding, reached a total of $9.2 billion. And this is a significant increase from 2020's funding. It's about 130% more. And when you break it down based on average deal amount from 2015 to 2020, the average deal is roughly 3.04 million. But in recently, the average deal has more than doubled to about $8.57 million per deal. And if you look at the chart lines, you can see that, in 2020, there was less funding than many thought that there weren't. This was due to the pandemic. So, interest rates rise, funds fell, and then in 2021, we saw a huge increase. Rates fell, people had a lot of cash to invest in, and we saw an enormous skyrocket into the VC funding world, and a lot of this went into HR tech. And although most of the data that you'll see today is based on the US, mostly under 50 employees and SaaS HR technology, I do think it's important to point out that in 2019, the US had about 53% of the total VC funds. And since that, it's increased to 65%. So the US still remains a pretty strong player in terms of geographic location for a lot of the HR tech startups. And I see that trend continuing to grow too. And this is a trajectory line. So it's sloping upwards, which indicates that there's a lot of areas within HR tech growth and upside from the VC perspective. But one thing that I think is important to keep in mind when you're looking at this chart is that the data doesn't really tell you how many startups have been successful, or if one subsegment has been dominating the funding and the rest have remained the same. So In the next slide, we'll take a further look into what the subsegments are actually telling us. But this is kind of, a graph to kind of paint the picture of the VC market so far within HR tech. So I'll pause there. If there's any questions, comments, anything that people are wondering.
This is quite helpful, Michaela.
Yeah.
All good. Thank you.
Thank you. So looking into the subsegments, I broke them down into 5. HCM, or Human Capital Management, which is comprised of subcategories core HRIS, or Human Resource Information Systems, and HRMS, Human Resource Management System, as well as collaboration and communication. And then you have talent acquisition, where you find job marketplaces, applicant tracking systems, and assessment software. And then payroll and composition, it's salary, benefits, anything related to the total composition package. And then 4 and 5 deal with mental health and learning. So, looking at wellness from a holistic perspective, and training, so employee development, both professional and personal. And then other, I've put compliance and analytics, which are, it's within the top 10 subcategories of HR tech. And I think, are really lending a hand and leading some of the trends so far. So within the past few years, the VC funds have mostly funneled into the first 3 subsegments, HCM, talent acquisition, and payroll and composition. So there's about $2.4 billion in HCM, about $2 billion in talent acquisition, and $1 billion in payroll and benefits that we saw in 2019. And then in 2020, we saw very similar numbers, across. HCM and talent acquisition were mostly even, and then payroll and benefits were just a little bit under. And in the top 5 venture capitalist deals of 2020, guess how many of those fell into those 3 categories? It was all of them. So the largest deal of 2020 was Rippling. It's an employee management all-in-one HR and IT platform at about $145 million that was invested into it. And then startups number 2, 4, and 5 of 2020 was Eightfold AI, which handles higher retention, faster hiring, greater diversity in applicant pools, and Handshake and Trusted Health, which are both job boards. I'm sure you might be familiar with some of them. It's job board for college students, and the latter for nurses. And then the third highest deal of 2020 was PayActive, which provides earned wage access to employees. And then, I wanted to take a look at 2020 and see if we were seeing kind of, the similar trends, or if there was something different. And we saw a very similar story in terms of money flow. So out of the top 5, 2 of them were payroll, or 2 of the highest were in payroll and benefits, Deal and Papaya Global, both payroll and benefit platforms. And then 2 in HCM, WorkRise and BetterUp, which are workforce management for skilled trades and a platform for people, team, organizational growth. And then the last one of the top 5 was Checker, which is talent acquisition. So, when we kind of look at the VC funding for total deals within 2020 and 2021, it looks like the narrative is pretty clear. With the data from Crunchbase, it's pointing towards administrative services, performance management, talent tech as really the top subcategories over the last few years. So, you say, all right, where's the story? It seems like tech is helping to solve and better human relations. And again, this is where I kind of bring up the original question of, can tech fully integrate with human relations? And it's where subsegments, 4 and 5 come into play. So within the last year, we went from mostly investing into talent management, recruiting software, and staffing to a lot of investment into people platforms for employers to engage in, looking at surveys, financial well-being, messaging, digital experience, people analytics, to also mental health, coaching, therapy, development, online learning, and those things really started to gain traction. And when I looked at the VC data, I thought what was even more interesting and everything that I found was that the first signs of these trends changing were actually seen in the VC world. Because although talent management, recruiting, and payroll and benefits had the highest total amount of dollars invested into them, the average deal invested in per company was actually the largest in mental health by almost 1.6 times talent management and 1.3 times payroll. And then this was followed by investment into people platforms as the second largest average dollar per deal for funding. And additionally to that, HCM and talent acquisition over the years normally attracts similar dollar volumes quarterly. And I think I quoted before about 2 billion for HCM and talent acquisition between 2019 and 2020. But of last year, HCM actually had 3 times as much invested into it than talent acquisition tech. And the top 3 subcategories invested in by the VCs were completely displaced from 2019 to 2020. And so we saw, job board marketplaces, payroll, and benefits go from the leading 3 to the leading 3 becoming collaboration and communication, learning, and wellness. And some of these examples of startups that we've seen become popular and people are investing in them is Articulate. It's an online training platform who received $1.5 billion in funding this year. Spring Health, it's a employee mental health care company raising 190 million. And then Ginger, which provides on-demand behavioral health coaching, video therapy, and mental health skill building activities, which received 100 million in a single funding round. So, in summary, I think what we're seeing here is that the money trail is showing us 2 different trends in all of these subsegments. When you look at total dollars being invested, it tends to go more towards the top 3. But if you're looking at average deal per company, you're looking at the bottom 2. And I think what's also interesting too is, I put compliance and other, and I think that, some of the compliance, employee relations, culture, these are other subcategories that weren't as prominent as the ones you see on here. Right now, those are just pieces. So they're often found in parts of HCM or talent acquisition. And they're usually smaller or more niche startups that haven't, gotten a lot of the major funding, but they are still there. And so, I think that's definitely important to point out. But yes, this is, I thought a lot of this information was very interesting to me because I would not have thought that, the average dollar per company of funding would differ that greatly from, the total amount being funded into subcategories. So again, I'll pause for questions or comments. Anything that, people found interesting or may have learned in this slide, would love to hear any and all of that.
I'll jump in super quick, and I probably don't have enough experience to ask these questions, but I will anyway. I know the Product 10X team is spinning up like a syndicate arm, right? Product 10X Ventures, and as they sort of move their way into investing into HR startups, it sounds like mental health and learning in these sort of bottom categories right here have like a higher growth potential in the next 5 to 10 years in comparison to the bulk categories that we see on top, like HCM and talent acquisition and stuff like that. Should Product 10X Ventures be looking towards the future and like looking into the highest growing categories or like the fastest growing categories like mental health and learning, or should they be focusing on those core categories of payroll and compensation talent acquisition and human and capital management? Like, what is your recommendation, just personally, based on your studies?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's something I will definitely touch upon in a later slide. But I think a preview of that is that I think it's important to have different investing strategies, and I think for Product 10x looking probably into smaller startups, you're looking at startups that are probably best in class in their solutions, and there's been a difference that I will also touch upon later of looking at startups that focus, on a component of these. And I think that's where mental health and wellness is. There's a lot of singular companies and components that you can focus on. You can focus on the therapy part of it, or the coaching part of it, or the online learning part of it. Like, they're all different facets. And then there's startups that are focusing on kind of system consolidation, or providing an integrated platform. And I think the first three, those are core. I think they're definitely in a rise right now, and I think they will stay. But I think given the remote work environment right now, which I think to some degree is definitely here to stay, I think mental health and learning is something that a lot of companies don't, and HR doesn't have a lot of exposure to. So I will break it down later and when I cover it in the slides. But I kind of look at it as system infrastructure versus the human part of HR. So to indirectly answer your question, Jordan, I think both. But I think for Product 10x, probably talent acquisition and mental health and learning are the top spaces.
Yeah. And Mikkel, one of the things that I did notice is, especially around the talent acquisition, the candidate lifecycle management today has become an extremely important aspect of the entire integrated lifecycle. I mean, just the approach around it. What are your thoughts around it?
Yes, I think that the talent acquisition landscape has changed, right? And especially with the Great Resignation, candidates are asking for more. There's more opportunity in the marketplace for them, and HR systems need to be able to reach out to them, to be a better sourcing tool, to be a better analytical tool to redirect candidates, not just reject candidates. And then on top of that, how do we retain them? And I think that this is something where the employers have always had the power in acquiring, and it was the candidate was just lucky to have been found. And now that's kind of that's kind of switched. And I will, so the next slide will talk a lot about the macro trends that are happening, and how HR tech is usually one of the last departments within corporate that is kind of advanced in this. And I think that's a great point. The talent acquisition landscape has changed, and there's it's not only securing the right talent, but it's also securing diverse talent. There's sort of a social component into hiring now that there wasn't before, and there's not a lot of technology that supports, okay, how do we describe a best fit for the role? What does that mean anymore? Can you necessarily look at hard skills in a paper? How much do the soft skills, how much do fitting minority groups into the company, looking at the structure and the board, those types of things. So I think there's a lot within the talent acquisition space, and I think one thing that's a potential risk to that is that a lot of things with a lot of software with AI and ML, there's a lot of biases built into them. And I think that talent acquisition tech is ripe for those biases, making software on how to figure out which candidates are best also puts in biases that you might have and not really know. So I did read some research indicating, as much as there is AI and ML coming out to source candidates, there's also AI and ML coming out to kind of try to combat some of those biases that we're seeing, which I think will be very interesting.
And we are also seeing the trend of obviously the spurt in programmatic job advertising as well. Jovio and Appcast and few other leaders are truly, I think, Pandalogic is one of the companies. Yeah, and these are some of them that have truly changed the landscape right now. But fascinating. I mean, what you have put together.
Yes, yes. And now with the remote landscape, and it's harder to source people in person. You have to figure out where every company is vying for attention, meaning engagement on their site, engagement with recruiters, how to kind of funnel the candidates into the hiring pool. So this is all definitely part of it as well.
Thank you.
All right, so the next slide talks about some of the macroeconomic trends. There's already been some growing trends in the last decade, thanks to the digital age. I would say the first three fall into that category: accessibility to information, improving interactiveness, and scalability. So accessibility to information, I think, this is probably one of the biggest trends that I've seen, even outside of HR tech. A lot of systems are looking, and platforms are looking to become a one-stop shop, system consolidation. And what that really means within the HR tech industry is there's a lot of HR tools out there, but few are software, HR software ecosystems. And so when you have a lot of siloed applications and HR systems, it causes a lot of poor user experiences and duplicative data. And as companies grow larger and become more responsible for functions, not to say adapting to the remote workforce, this makes for more processes and things to account for, which increases in complexity and integration touch points needed, especially with workforce and talent management. So what I like to think of a one-stop shop in HR tech is large platforms encompassing all life cycles of HR, or what we call hiring to retiring. So platforms that deal with hiring, onboarding, recruiting, payroll, benefits, surveys, time off, compensation, monitoring performances, feedback loops. So systems that deal with some of those things, or all of them. I don't think all of them exist yet, but at least some of them. And I can personally attest to that right now in my corporate job. Our HR systems, there's multiple platforms, and often I don't even know where all of them are, how to access them. And this results in a lot more touch points that are probably unneeded, emails and requests and reminders. And I can't even imagine kind of the admin overhead that might cause. So having one-stop shop platforms creates lower systematic error, a holistic experience for the candidate or for the employee. And from a cost perspective, fewer systems means more efficient, faster, from a database and a vendor perspective. So that's the first major trend that I think we're seeing outside of HR tech, that has now made its way into HR tech, and a lot more companies are looking to kind of have those one-stop shop platforms, whether they're building them in-house or they're outsourcing them. And then the second one is evolving hiring needs and recruiting life cycle. So touched upon this a little bit, but yes, Juggy, to your point, diversifying talent pool, engaging with prospects globally. How do we reach them? How do we source them? How do we use data to enrich the process? I researched some startups that are dealing with email deliverability, automating those, having rule-based communication campaigns so that you can tailor messages and have reliable deliverability and clicks, and then having the dashboard showing you those KPIs and analytics and what it can mean for candidates who are soliciting interest and how far along they get in the hiring process, whether or not they are good candidates. There's browser plugins to find candidates, discover email addresses, adding them to email candidates. And then the last one that I found that I thought was very interesting is single searchable databases to capture prospective candidates across a company's CRM or ATS, so customer relationship management or applicant tracking software. I think, there's a lot happening with databases these days, and trying to be able to not only capture all of that information, but to have actionable insights that you can tell about your prospective candidates, that you're really, so that HR is really, focusing their time on the right people and making sure that they're delivering a personable and customizable journey for them. And then the third trend within information that I think we've seen is having instant and intuitive information. Today people are so used to having instant information at their fingertips that's really easily digestible. And this is something that I think is definitely a growing area for HR tech. Look at, HR portals. Like I had described before, having so many different places for information and spending so much time searching for that information instead of having it all in one place. Or case management and knowledge bases. So being able to resolve questions through real-time portals, or having chat boxes that will use AI and ML to start off the conversation, and even if they can't answer, to be able to redirect to the correct department within HR. And then within that, I think there's a lot to do with employee information. So when you're onboarding or terminating employee, or making a internal move in a company, having access to employee files right away, having systems that are talking to each other, that can look at whether that's resume or job reviews, or what the current salary and composition is, or any of that any of that information, being able to communicate it from system to system, or having that all into one integrated platform. And then the second major trend I would say is the improving interactiveness. So being able, now we're in the digital remote age, being able to reach people whenever and wherever with a customized approach, connecting with candidates, having targeted and thoughtful outreaches to form high quality interactions, being able to engage with candidates offline and online, having the systems and the resources to be able to have an up-to-date website, to have career expo, to have virtual career fairs, and to reach people remotely, mobile, desktop, all those kind of ads, social media, those types of platforms. And then I think the major one is company websites. So in the past, websites used to be a place of static information. And I think, it's grown to be part of the job search experience. And companies really need to have a good user interface with engaging, informative material. And many of these websites are outdated, and startups, that can help companies kind of transform their websites, who may not want to have to build it in-house, but would rather outsource, and adding things in like employee video testimonials. I know that multinational hospitality has become a growing trend, showing things, not just about what is the work and what is the company actually do, but also things like, is their social media? What are they doing from a charitable perspective? Are they involved in community initiatives? Are people genuinely happy at work? I think that the whole work experience has kind of become more than just work, and HR systems really need to be able to communicate that their company offers these things. And then the third one from the digital age is scalability. So having a infrastructure ecosystem that allows companies to really grow and expand, to be able to build products and systems on top of each other or next to each other, and making sure that that base foundation is really adaptive to new technology and not being reactive. So I think that this is a trend that we're seeing across all technology and services, not just HR tech, but something that it definitely is having more of an impact in HR tech. And I think that having an HR resource ecosystem can help with administrative overhead that it often accompanies with growth. So some of the things are having automated processes with documentation and review that are easy to update, integrating APIs to help make HR processes scalable, looking at HR's legal compliance and cybersecurity. Right now, we're in a pretty volatile economy, and it creates a lot of upside, but I also think it creates a lot of risk. So making sure that you have analytical software for compliance training, identifying blind spots, analyzing a company risk, looking at cyber vulnerabilities, those types of things as well. So those are the three, I would say, big trends from the digital age that I think have been happening in society that have, then their effects have trickled down into HR tech and kind of, it started some of the trends that we're seeing in startups and where we're seeing dollars invested. And where we're going to see dollars to continue to be invested. And then, even with those trends, I think there's some other trends that are equally as important. Since the pandemic began, and in the last year in particular, I think it's caused a lot of people to reevaluate and reassess their lives, especially in the working world. People asking themselves, what is it that I value? How do I choose to spend my time? Losing and creating boundaries between work and personal life, asking what their priorities are, emphasizing physical and mental health, and the list goes on, but similar to those things, which I think has given rise to the engagement and social responsibility. So engagement, real-time feedback, I think that's a really big one in HR tech right now. With talent acquisition, being able to communicate and automate the hiring and onboarding process, having software systems that give real-time alerts, tasks, notification, tells the candidate and the HR departments where's the application at, what needs to happen, automating surveys to measure the candidate experience, post-interview and onboarding questionnaires, automating the offer management piece of it, delivering text engagements. There's a whole new way to kind of reach and engage with candidates these days. And I think in the past it's been a lot of one-to-one, a lot of emails, a lot of waiting on the candidate side. But as we're seeing, candidates don't want to wait anymore, and they don't have to wait anymore. And companies are starting to have to figure out, how do we keep them engaged, and how can we speed up our hiring process so that we don't lose valuable candidates. So I think there's a lot of growth opportunity in those areas, as well as in the application kind of transparency process in those areas. And then also
Michaela,
yeah
I was curious, as you researched this,
Yeah.
I was part of a project last summer with Stanford. And one of the things that came up in that project was that systemic racism still exists in HR practices and how screening occurs inherently in the technology. And I was curious if that came up at all, with the move towards DEI more and more. Did you find that at all in the startup space with anyone that's doing that incredibly well?
Yes, yes, I did find that a lot in the startup space, and no, I did not find a startup that is actually doing that incredibly well. I think this is an area where they're having a lot of trouble figuring out, identifying what their biases are and how to mitigate that within the technology. I did read upon, some startups, they're looking at, okay, simple things like taking a resume and removing identification features. Some startups that are taking applicants and removing anything personal that could, suggest that they may not be from a majority or have different minorities, and see if that, creates more of a fair and equitable process. I think that, a lot of HR systems right now, there often isn't unification across their candidate experiences. So there's some things that the human is always in, whether it's the interviewers, how do they ask those questions? Like, yes, maybe you can have the system, give you a list of quote unquote random and fair questions. But if you're still having a practice of having humans ask them, like, how do you measure those responses? And I think that, there are systems that are coming out that are more only technology interviews. So automated kind of self interviews where they're tracking through video, through risk and written assessment, and then through kind of IQ tests to kind of remove some of the human aspect of it. But then you have to ask yourself, okay, is what they're analyzing of that candidate's response, is that fair given the background of everyone? How do we kind of combat technology putting everyone on a fair plate if people didn't start even? And I think that that's why that some companies is why they're arguing that humans should still have kind of a hand in that process, while other companies and startups that have gone towards a completely automated and test system of that are arguing, no, that's kind of a dependency that we don't want to have. So I think to answer your question, no, I hadn't seen any startup that had done a really good job with all these factors. And I think it's because there isn't a lot of time that's been spent in looking at how do we kind of combat the systemic racism and racial things that we're seeing today within the actual code or within the actual AI and ML. Yeah. Oh, is there another question? And then, okay, so in terms of social digital network, so I think we've seen traditional HR platforms known for its records, but now HR platforms are expected to really engage, not just record things, and provide that social network and social aspect for their employees to remain connected in each other. And so I saw some startups that have provided platforms where it has things as simple as people's birthdays and work anniversaries coming up. So it's just like Facebook. You can congratulate them. You can give team shout outs. You can have employee appreciation posts. Being able to highlight employees with video integrated emails, chatting with HR employees, and really staying in touch with past employees. So these are some of the social network aspects that I think people are looking for HR systems to be responsible for. And there have been a few startups in this space that have provided platforms that can easily integrate into HR systems to allow these things. And then the last pillar I would say is social responsibility. I like to call this social compliance. I think there's a lot of things that are happening in today's space, like the Me Too movements, D&I initiatives, looking at companies being ESG friendly, and this leads into providing mental health and wellness resources. HR, it's being expected that they have services for therapy, or at least resources and awareness for mental health topics, and that they're being a leading and active participant in the discussion and being proactive. And in order for this to happen, they need to have the technology and the software to be able to either in-house these platforms, or to be able to outsource them. So I think a lot of startups have benefited from this. There's Lyra Health, which is the mental health and coaching services, which has gained a lot of VC funding dollars. And this is, I know my company uses them. I know a lot of other companies use them. So, and then on top of that, I think employee development and training, this is another big area. Employees are expecting development resources for their personal and their professional development. And HR systems don't really incorporate those things. And we're seeing a lot of startups that are focusing on kind of the learning and the training and the development whether it's, for their job, whether it's for outside of their job, whether it's for other topics that are cross-related, that employees are really looking to, diversify their skills. And again, these are platforms that I think are mostly standalone right now, kind of best in class solutions, but I think there's definitely a big opportunity for integrated platforms, and especially for, mental health and wellness and employee training to kind of merge into one area. So this brings me to the last slide. Where do I see the best investment opportunities moving forward? And Jordan, you asked the right question here. And these are the three areas that, I see: system infrastructure, artificial intelligence and machine learning, and then addressing the human and HR. So like I've mentioned before, prior to 2020, most of the VC money went to innovative startups that offered standalone, the best in class solutions that those firms were later acquired by larger enterprise players to help them enhance, some of their own HR suites. And now we're seeing kind of the opposite trend coming, where many of the current deals are going to slightly more mature talent management companies that tackle whole segments of HR, like the global payroll and the corporate training. But we're also seeing still the standalone best-in-class solutions for, kind of the mental health and wellness and employment training. But in terms of the first three segments, HCM, talent acquisition, and payroll and benefits, the deals are more so going towards, the slightly more mature ones that offer kind of solutions for everything, the one-stop shop platforms. But, I think in order to enhance existing products or offer new ones, a company's foundational system infrastructure has to be built correctly. And so, this is where I think we are now. So pillar one, I think a lot of companies are rebuilding their entire HR ecosystem bottom up, which leaves the opportunity for startups offering, already integrated systems or pieces of those integrated systems that can easily fit in. So things like, again, imagine if there was a mental health service startup that also offered fitness, that also offered learning and development, all within, one kind of platform or service. Or imagine a talent acquisition portal that had, a job portal, a dashboard of applicants with different views for the employer and the candidate, automated emails, automated kickoff to the onboarding process, a dashboard to help with live tracking, updating owners with a company, within the company of tasks still needing to be completed. So this is kind of where I see, the future of some of this system consolidation and system infrastructure going. I think that a lot of these things are standalone right now and focusing on, a piece of the process. But I think at some point, we're going to start to see startups who are focusing more in one-stop shop solutions. And, as you start to rework your infrastructure, you're also going to need to update your user interfaces. I think startups that can offer data analytical insights on company websites, clicks, KPIs for both the candidate soliciting interest and also employees on what resources they're looking at, or, what are the questions that people are wondering. But startups in general offering data analytical insights, on the hiring, on sourcing. I think that's going to be, a big area as well. And then lastly, solutions that are being built that'll comply with cloud friendly, or at least hybrid right now. By 2026, it's forecasted that over 50% of the mid-market to large enterprises are going to be investing into cloud tech, mostly concentrated in admin, HR, and talent management. But we're seeing, more of these services being utilized in the cloud. An example of this is Gusto. This is a startup that provides cloud-based payroll, benefits, HR management software. So I think there's, also big opportunity in there. And then the second and third pillars, this is kind of where I see the future. So system infrastructure is where we are now, and AI and ML and human and HR is where we're going. I think AI chat boxes, I've seen a lot of startups concentrated around this, whether it's, external to answer candidate questions, or to reach out to them, or to help with internal processes. The HR portal having a chat box to help with, identifying what the question is being asked, automatically routing it to the department, taking into account less touches with humans. Predictive analytics, I think there's a big market out there on matching candidates with job seekers, having interviews of different formats, being able to predict a candidate's fit for the role. Code Signal is a startup that has an automated skills-based assessment platform that companies are utilizing, analyzing the likelihood of hiring a candidate on time. I know there's a big gap and a big shortage of workers right now. So seeing, when might I need to hire a candidate? How long is it going to take? Are we going to hire in time? Looking at how many candidates are in each stage of the hiring process versus the actual pass-through rates. And this can help, kind of the workforce management of a company. And then one of my favorite things is retain, reject. So instead of outrightly rejecting a candidate, losing an employee who's looking, using AI to redirect them to, other jobs where they might be a better fit, or, might be a better opportunity. There's a lot of technology out there that's analyzing someone's information or interviews that they took and matching them to a database of open jobs, ranking best positions to worst positions, so that if the candidate doesn't fit this one, okay, we can move them to another opening without necessarily having to start over. And it's definitely harder to attain new talent than it is to retain existing talent, or to start that hiring process over. But one of the biggest pain points in HR tech right now is that a lot of these systems don't talk to each other, which forces candidates to have to restart the process if they want to switch, or internally it's just a lot of overhead. It's a lot of back and forth communication because these systems aren't necessarily talking to each other. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, in some of those areas as well. And then the last one I would say is the human in HR. So, looking at the generational values, assessing what generation or what each of the generations value, and measuring those values into something. So whether that's compensation packages, into the entire employee experience, using workforce analytic tools to build models to understand, if I have a shortage of X skills, or these workers, in this department over this time, what does that mean? How can I kind of navigate and fix this so that I can be proactive and not reactive, to shortage of staffing. Helping companies piece together a return on investment equation, like detecting work patterns, measuring behaviors, and benchmarking employees across peers and industries. So really looking at the workforce management and viewing employees as an asset, not a cost. I think in the past, employees were mostly seen as just a cost on the balance sheet, but really they're becoming an asset. And what that means from a HR tech perspective is you have to be able to invest into their employee satisfaction. But what does that mean, right? And one of the answers to this, I think, is wellness at work from a holistic perspective. Being able to have, some of those mental health platforms, employee training platforms really integrated into your HR systems, offering them. So I think that, startups that can touch upon some of these areas and either sell themselves to larger, more mature companies is definitely an opportunity, or startups that can kind of offer, multiple of these solutions across a wider base will be successful as well. And, personally, I think it's important to keep in mind that, the money might not tell you everything. You know, as we saw, total deal value versus average deal value led us to two different outcomes in areas where dollars are being invested. And yeah, so I think, you know, if we return to our original question of can tech relations integrate with human relations, I think there is always going to be a struggle between the two. And even as we head towards the metaverse, there will always be pushback. And so this is why, you know, I would advocate Product 10X to probably invest in both of those areas. Look at what's now, you know, system infrastructure. Yes, we're already in it, but HR usually tends to be one of the last areas that a lot of corporate companies invest in. And so I still think there's a lot of money on the table in startups that are looking at how to better the system infrastructure. I think cloud enablement is going to be a huge area. And then, you know, where are we going? What's in the future? AI and predictive analytics and ML, there's a lot of cash on the table there. But again, I think that some of the risks to that is the biases, addressing the systemic racism, which is directly seen and impacts HR. And then, so, you know, lastly, my last point would just be, you know, we have, as humans, we have our thoughts and feelings and emotions and values. And I think that, you know, tech can influence these things, but they can't decide those things for us. And so that's why, you know, startups that are focusing kind of on the human qualities of us, or, you know, wellness at work, workforce analytic tools, these are something that, you know, will always be a factor and always be an opportunity to invest in.
Awesome. Fantastic. Michaela, really, really deep, you know, analysis and presentation. Any questions for her, Michaela, while we have a few minutes?
Yeah, I just want to share with you, Michaela, extremely impressive, great job. I know how much work went into putting this together. And this is very helpful for us as we continue to advise and work with some of the companies, leaders, and also as we evaluate new companies in the portfolio as well. This is a good kind of insights for us to drive that way.
Thank you. Yes, and I definitely enjoyed researching a lot of this. I learned a lot of new things, and it was kind of my first peek into VC data as well. Which at the surface, at first, I was like, I do not know what any of this means. So to kind of parse together, you know, what that means, looking at things from a macro and economic point of view, and just culturally what's happening in the world right now, and trying to piece that together.
Yeah. I know there is at least the pandemic actually accelerated that entire conversation. We saw so many things that popped up, which we may have taken for granted a couple of years ago.
Yes, agreed. And I think, you know, I think what we're seeing too with the Great Resignation is HR is kind of being flipped on its head. And I don't think that, you know, they necessarily have a strategy or a vision of how to kind of combat that. And I think that this is being reflected in the tech itself. And this is why, you know, there's not, Jeffrey, to what you had said, you know, there's not clear-cut answers to some of these questions, because I don't think companies actually know, not even what the answer is, but what they want the answer to be. And I think, you know, as some of those things get figured out, some of the HR tech will start aligning.
Awesome.